So I had a topic, and then I'm at the end of this session. So now my topic is my first slide, and everything else is a little bit different than what my abstract talked about. My co-author, Dr. Bergeron at Coastal Carolina University, I stole some of the work that she's doing with HoloLens, so we can come back to where you were asking earlier about HoloLens and talk about that a little bit. But whenever we're looking at virtual representations through geospatial technologies, we're looking at a few different things. We have a lot that's been here for a while, but we have a lot of tools that are becoming more readily available to us. Okay. So the 30 years aspect, we've been dealing with virtual reality for a long time. We've had stereo imagery that we've been dealing with for over 100 years. We have access to hardware that goes back into the 50s and 60s. We have the idea of the word virtual reality going back into the 80s. We, of course, get to the 90s where we have commercial access to these technologies. We go into a little bit further into the 90s. We see a lot more integration with geospatial technologies, so GPS, where you have soldiers in the field who are seeing data that's relevant to their location. We begin to see a lot more use of simulation and virtual reality in terms of cockpit simulations. And as we continue on with commercial access and hardware access, we begin to see these environments go from head-mounted, which some of our earliest ones are, to larger scale. And we're kind of seeing, as we go through this, these set of tools repeat over and over again. We start out with head-mounted. We go to larger stereo displays. We come back to head-mounted. We go to larger displays. We're coming back around to head-mounted again. And this year at CES, we actually began to see more stereo displays. So we're actually just seeing another set of iterations of these technologies taking us around and around. So as we get into augmented to support the virtual reality, we're still seeing things that we're creating, and that's one of the best things to kind of grasp onto with the idea of virtual reality is that we're creating things. We're taking our GIS data, we're taking photographs, but we're creating new worlds. We're world building whenever we're doing any of this. And so whether it's augmentation through things like Google Glass or virtual reality that we can do for a cell phone and a $10 cardboard box, we're really getting to the point where we can hand this to more or less anyone. HTC Vive, just to kind of give something other than the Oculus you've seen so much of today. And of course the HoloLens, which gives us that ability to combine the Kinect, to combine the photogrammetry that we're getting through some of these other things that people have talked about today, and then mix in the virtual reality aspects for mixed reality and augmented reality. So that's what my original presentation was supposed to be. Just to go through a few terms that go along with that, there are a few of them that, of course, are very important to us already in GIS. The movement from 2D to 2.5 and 3D takes us to a little bit more of a problematic place in terms of dealing with the data, especially as we go through the 90s and 2000s. But we're to the point now where with point clouds, we have software to deal with it. We have things like Structure for Motion that allows us to really deal with 3D in a whole new way and have access to that data. Stereo, of course, we're using stereo imagery for a lot of the visualization. So whether we're talking about the Oculus, whether we're talking about the HoloLens, it's still using that 2-eye visualization. And of course, whenever we're talking about the large room-sized stereo, it's using that as well. We've already heard the term game engine. This is where we kind of begin to fall down in geospatial technologies. We want to be able to share these things. We want to be able to interact with them very easily. We can do a certain amount, whether we're talking about creating 3D representations and moving around them from grass. We've been able to do that for years. And then ArcScene and various other proprietary pieces of software have allowed us to do that. But it doesn't allow us to do it well. It doesn't allow us to readily and through rule-based definitions populate those environments. And though software and research has been done for that for quite some time, the fact that the gaming industry and the movie industry has had billions of dollars thrown at it for the last 20, 30 years to make this happen makes our lives a lot easier. We can take advantage of open source programs like Blender. We can take advantage of non-commercial free access to Unity and Unreal. So these game engines that allow us to take our data from our GIS with a little bit of massaging and put it into a game engine, suddenly we're not just stuck with being able to click here and hopefully get to this place over here or create a pre-recorded flight line. We can go in. We can use a game controller. We can go in and use an IVE or an augmented reality headset and interact with the world and, more importantly, navigate the world in a way that we haven't been able to before. Of course, virtual reality allows us to look at this kind of from an enclosed environment. You've seen the IVEs. You saw the picture of a cave earlier, so a multi-sided room with projectors, projection system coming in from the back and even projecting down to the floor. I think Duke has a 6-sided cave, so you're actually getting projection onto the ceiling and the floor as well. And whenever we're dealing with VR, and really any of these, one of the other terms that we really have to be aware of is haptics. We like being able to look at these things, but to make them real to the users, to make them real to our clients or for ourselves, if someone is making something for us, we want them to be able to interact with it. And interact with it not just by clicking on something, but if we push something, we want to be able to feel that feedback. And that's where we're talking about haptics, is that sensory feedback, which goes along with adding in sound, smell to some extent. I've always been kind of standoffish on the smell aspect, but that's me. And that brings us to augmented reality, of course, where we're overlaying information onto physical objects in the real world. And of course, gestures, which is where we're moving now with many of these environments. We're not worried about a mouse. We're not worried about a button. We're actually using our hands to do a lot of this work for us. So whether we're talking about our mobile device and being able to touch on the screen, or something like the HoloLens where you use a gesture like this as a back button. That's it. Just moving your hand like that says go back to the previous screen. So we're changing these things the way that we're using computers every day. So those are our tools. And again, the subtitle, if you didn't catch that at the beginning, was a tool, a goal, and a platform. So now we're moving into the goals. What are our goals for using geovisualization? What are our goals for augmented reality? What are our goals for virtual reality? Any of these. And one of the biggest things is to be dynamic. To be able to take our information and put our users in it in a way that they can readily understand it. We can get an actual real-world response from them. We can put them into a park and understand what their sense of safety is just by looking at visualization. I mean, Gibson and others would have been going crazy back in the 50s and 60s to be able to have the level of technology we have today to be able to look at these things. And so being able to work with our data in a different way, in a dynamic way, changes things. We also want to be able to make sure that it's interactive. Again, here we're looking at a cave. This is a few years ago, so a little bit older technology, older models. But just being able to use a game controller to be able to move around the environment, to be able to go in, select materials. We've seen both in terms of the tangible landscape, being able to use a laser pointer to select areas and to create routes, or in the IVE, being able to use a simple look and click gesture, which again comes back around to what the HoloLens is using as well. Any of these type of things allow us to, again, be in a more dynamic world, to be able to take advantage of these. So you can imagine as a planner, as a GIS professional, being able to take a community and not just tell them about what they're going to see, not just show them pictures, virtual representations of what they're going to see, but actually sitting them in something like this. Of course, you have to take them somewhere to do this. But you can do a simple version with just a screen and projector and a controller, or putting an IVE on them, and letting them look. We're getting to a completely different level of being able to interact, not just with our data, but with our constituencies that we're trying to explain things to. As we look at another goal of this is to be experiential. Again, if we want to be dynamic, if we want to be interactive, the whole goal of that then is to have an experience of that landscape, of the world, of the data that we're interacting with, that we're presenting. We do this in a few different ways by making that information engaging. One of the biggest things right now in terms of web mapping is, whether you want to use Esri's term or others, but story maps, and being able to have a narrative. Being able to have that narrative means that whenever you have someone in that environment, they have an idea of where they're going to go. Even if they don't go in the order that you want them to go, they're still going to come out with the same story, hopefully, or at least parts of it, that you intended them to have. It's still cartography. We're still trying to explain things to people. We're just doing it in a new way with a new set of tools and with new definitions of those tools. Oops. Oh, I skipped one. Going on to the idea of immersive. So how many people here have not used the system upstairs or another Oculus do it? It's just being in that world, whether, again, it's a cave system, just, even the $10 cardboard with your phone in it. It's just so much a way to take you to a completely different place. There are different ways to interact with them. They also provide different aspects of information. So we have, again, manipulated imagery, where we have 3D models put into the real world. So this is Peru, this is HoloLens, which most of the time you think about HoloLens, you think about truly augmented, but you can actually do more or less virtual reality within the HoloLens as well. It's called HoloTour, one of their original tools. But we have this combination, again, of photogrammetry, so 360 camera information, 3D models, and being able to move around within it to have that experience, to be immersed, to interact. And so as we go through and we're doing this, we're building the virtual landscapes around us. We're building these worlds. We're taking our GIS data. We're taking our DEMs. If we have LiDAR, that's great. We can have very high resolution ground that we're walking around. Ironically enough, that can also be a problem, because whenever you convert the point cloud into something that's usable by the game engine, which doesn't like a true DEM, it wants a 256-bit value, it gets, well, okay, some like it more than others. You get, I don't know how to describe it. Just imagine if you had a microscope and you zoomed in on a cracker, how it just kind of goes bumpy, bump, 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 bump. It's just, so sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But we have lots of data that we can use. We have our water data, we have our elevation data, we have cultural data that we can represent through all of this. And so we're creating these worlds, and in some cases through photogrammetry, recreating them. Like I was saying before, we have close-range photogrammetry. We have mobile LiDAR. We have handheld LiDAR at this point, where we can go through and capture 3D models that we can readily put into these environments. So it's no longer just the surface that we're looking at. It's no longer just the buildings that we're looking at the tops of, but now between things like Blender, 3D Studio Max, close-range photogrammetry, we can go in and put in 3D models that are representations of the features in our GIS. Of course, for a long time, we've had stereo imagery, and we saw just a little while ago 360 cameras, and now these are to the point where you can go buy them off the store shelf. So Samsung, LG, and about 4 or 5 others all have models that are under $400 that you can just set up, take relatively high resolution, HD, most of them slightly higher than HD, but be able to take those directly into Oculus, into Gear VR or Cardboard, or even into HoloLens. So again, being able to take our data, create new data that we're taking in there is much easier. And of course, whether we're talking about, well, the obvious one, of course, is Esri deciding they wanted to spend millions of dollars on a procedural company. They understood that they were moving into a space where 3D was going to be important, and that we didn't want to go through and create all the 3D ourselves. And so, based on rules, we can populate an entire town now. And again, this isn't just City Engine. There's aspects of Blender that allow you to do this. There's a lot of different rule-based modeling technologies out there. So there are ways that we can take our GIS data and use it to build up the 3D without having to have all the knowledge that you need to be able to go through and build it building by building.
The Microsoft HoloLens.
And then, since we were talking about HoloLens, and of course I have access to one, I'm obsessed with it. So being able to share our experiences is something that's important. If you look at the community side of things for HTC Vive that's running on Steam or Oculus Store,
with the model.
what they're doing with HoloLens, what you can, of course, do with a physical cave, where you can have multiple people in the same space sharing the same experience. It takes your ability to talk to people to another level. So one of my fellow graduate students back at WVU worked with soil scientists, went out and said, okay, we have this group of soil scientists. Here is the landscape that you're looking at. Think about this. How would you each define this particular soil type?
And now you can look at it.
They're just standing in a cave, but they have, based on their own personal experience and knowledge,
even better, we can take
the data that we have available to them, that we can pull up quickly in the cave, the ability to sit there, talk about it, say what they would each do, and then come to a consensus without having to go out to the field. Now, yes, they could do this by sitting around a monitor, but it's much more impressive whenever you're looking at it in 3D. So these shared experiences are changing the way that we're looking at this. And whenever you think of something like the Oculus, whenever you think of something like the HoloLens, you're not necessarily in the same room. You can be collaborating with someone on the other side of the planet, both looking at the same model, especially as we're seeing more and more of the data sitting in the cloud, being able to push out 3D scenes through Web3D has become a much more manageable thing. So that is where we end. Basically, my rah-rah go for the idea of course, where we've been with VR and augmented reality as a tool, the goals that we have for utilizing these technologies for immersion, experience, dynamic access, interaction, being able to share those experiences, they all can provide a platform that we're using the hardware, the software, the data, in the same way that we're using GIS right now as a platform to be able to share information, make arguments, and of course, tell stories visually.